All right, we'll call this meeting to order. It is 6:06. On, let me get the date right, February 13th, 2023. This is a work session of the West Liberty City Council. And as well, we have with us as our guests, the trustees of the rural townships. And the many members of the volunteer fire department association. And we are going to hear tonight a presentation from the mayor's fire task force to the council, to all of us present, about the work that the task force has been doing to put together the idea, proposing a new fire agency. What I'd like to do actually, instead of doing a roll call, is actually have everybody introduce themselves, if we could do that. And so city council, if you could go first, and then I'd ask the rural trustees who are here, if you could introduce yourselves, as well as fire department members, if you could, just so we can kind of all get to know who's here in the room. Could we start that way?
Sure.
Dana, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everybody. Dana Dominguez. I helped co-chair this task force with Eric. Is there anything else?
No, that's all that's needed.
Great.
I'm Josh Schiltz.
Sorry, I thought we were just doing the task force.
No, everybody, yeah, the whole council, yeah. Introduce, if you are on the task force, and make that clear, yeah, but.
I'm so sorry.
Councilmember Josh Schiltz. I'm Mayor Ethan Anderson.
Councilmember Cara McFerren. I'm also on the task force.
Councilmember Ashley Smith. I'm not on the task force.
And our fifth council member, Omar Martinez, is on his way. He's traveling.
He's also a fireman.
And also on the fire department. Yes, exactly. Rural trustees, could you just introduce yourself for us?
Well, I'm Dick Brand, rural trustee. I'm on the task force.
Mark Matson, I'm a trustee, also on the task force.
Al Feldman, I'm a trustee, secretary, treasurer. Clarence Fincham, Lake Township trustee.
Recent Lake Township is
Ralph Tanner, Lake Township trustee.
Excellent.
Shari.
Jerry Anderson, Boston Township Clerk.
Thank you for being here. Fire department. Could we have you
Start? Yep.
Yeah.
Eric Christensen, firefighter EMT and member of task force.
I'm Mindy Sickles Sturbins. I'm the secretary treasurer for the fire department and also on the task force. And Chief Sickles is zooming in today.
Oh.
He's actually sick and running a fever and stuff. So I told him he should not expose his germs to everyone else. So I know he's here. He's just unwilling to say.
Great. Thank you for being here. I don't know if you can see us. Fire department members, we'd love to just, if you'd introduce yourself, if you're inclined.
Tammy Wiggum, EMS coordinator, firefighter.
Carlos Hawkins, firefighter.
Alexia Martinez, firefighter.
Lane Kelly.
Oh, Larry Miller, man about town.
Interested party, ex-firefighter.
There you go.
Lane Kelly, fireman, EMT. Kurt Eklund, firefighter, EMT.
Paul Reed, firefighter.
Brandon Grassi, firefighter, EMT.
Excellent. Great. It's great to be here together. This task force has done a ton of work, and I've sat in on the last few meetings with them. And so it's kind of been fun to follow along and learn all that I can. Dana is the chair of the task force, and she asked me if I would do a kind of a brief introduction to kick it off. And then we'll go all the way through the presentation from the task force. And then we will go into a time of questions. Now, we had a process set up to write down your questions and send them in. I might amend that, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind. And Mr. Christensen, if you don't mind, I think with a small group, we probably can skip that step. You know, so we're kind of a smaller group here than we were kind of prepared for. So after the presentation after we've gone all the way through that, then we'll go through a round of questions. I'll start by, well, we'll start that time, and if we can just go one at a time. If you could stand up and again, just refresh our memory with your name when this time comes and who you're representing, and then kind of state your question, and the task force, I think, can respond to those. The topic of those questions will be restricted to the documents that we're discussing tonight, right? So that's an important point. We're going to be talking about this 28E proposal. And so that's what the discussion will be about. Let's see, did I miss anything here as we get started? They asked me to chair this meeting, and do my best, guys. The situation up until now, I'll try my best to recap. It's a complicated issue, so we'll try to, let me try to just recap what I've learned as I've dug into this. There has to be an entity to manage the public tax dollars that are collected for fire services, right? So for many years, that entity, it was designated as the city government of West Liberty. And that's the situation that we're in right now. Is the fiduciary responsibility for those funds is the city government of West Liberty. The fire department is, the best way I think I've come to learn is kind of a hybrid department, I think is maybe a phrase to use. There's a lot of pieces of it are under the umbrella of the city, but then obviously the firefighters have their own association with their own bylaws. And so there's kind of a combination of those two things at play. The townships that surround the city, which we call the rural townships, they elect trustees, and they also collect tax dollars and pay into that fund for fire protection. The way that it's set up right now is kind of like, and this is a rough approximation, but it's helped me to kind of get my head around it. The fire department and the city are kind of a semi-combined unit, and they are like the vendor. The rural trustees are kind of like a client, right? They're paying in and receiving services. Now, fire would like to have more control, more hands-on effort in some of the pieces of what goes on in managing the fire department. And so that's the piece that they're basically asking for. In a way, I guess the way I've been thinking about it is fire department is kind of interviewing for that job, right? Is like saying, we can do this, give us a chance, and we're gonna do this well. The rural townships want to have more of a voice in the say of what happens with the funds, right? And so there's a little bit now, if you read the current 2080 agreement, rural trustees have to approve large expenditures, for example, but there isn't as much of a seat at the table as it doesn't equate with the funds that are being put in, right? So there's kind of that's two separate but related things happening at the same time.
Not only just the financial, the decision making.
Absolutely. So the proposal then is that instead of the fire department being joined with the city government, that it would become its own entity, that would then become the vendor, and city and rural would both be clients, if you want to use that kind of language, while also being the funding agents for that agency. And then the representatives from those bodies would be on the board of that fire agency. There's a lot of work still to be done, but the groundwork for that potential change has been laid, and that's kind of the document we're going to go through. Guys, did I do okay? Did I do all right? Okay, all right, good to hear. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it on to the task force to take it away.
All right, so, let's see, so in your packets, we have, did you all get packets printed for you?
I didn't print packets for.
Do you have copies of the draft?
No.
Okay, So, you've all seen the other things, so I kind of scripted this out so I wouldn't mess it up, so bear with me. So we have the draft in front of us. The council also has copies of the presentation slides that were given in September, for your information, and then including a timeline as well of that. Also, the council was given a budget that Mindy had created. To kind of go over, well, we will talk about this a little bit later, try not to get ahead of myself. And then I don't see the memo from the attorney, but that was all forwarded to the council in an email, so you can look over kind of the recommendations that our city attorney had for the task force. And we did talk about those recommendations and make some updates to the current draft that the council has in front of them and task force members also have in front of them. So as far as the framework goes, the draft, and Mindy, you have explained this a lot better than myself, so jump in here, is kind of a hybrid kind of arrangement. Because there are a lot of things in there that could easily be just put into bylaws. All right, so when we do come up with this 28E agency, we want to create an agreement amongst the parties so we know our expectations and the legality of the partnership that we're in. But there's a lot of other things in the draft that could easily be taken out and kind of put into bylaws. And the bylaws would be created, I believe, did we say by the volunteers and approved by the agency?
By the association, yes.
By the
So-
association, sorry, by the Fire and EMS Association.
So some of this information, you can't approve a 28E agreement without knowing some of the
Yeah.
information that's in this document. So the 28E agreement that the city and the rural trustees actually sign will be a much simpler, a more simplistic version of this agreement that you have in front of you. You can't really sign one without understanding certain impacts that the 28 agreement will have on, the structure of and how the entity is set up. So that's why a lot of this redundant information about board terms and, different things, resignations and all of that stuff are in here so that you understand that how your voting power will work. Just because you have 2 seats at the table, what does that mean? You kind of need to understand that, in my opinion, in order to make an informed decision about what that means.
And whether or not if this would work for everybody, right? To kind of know the behind the scenes. So the kind of intro articles, articles 1 through 4, are very basic, and anything highlighted, by the way, are things that the task force either couldn't quite agree on, things we might need more information on. We're just not quite sure how to make that a final recommendation. So that could be kind of some focus areas when you go back to the trustees and when you go back to volunteers and when the city council gets a chance to go through and vet this, to really focus on those highlighted areas in the draft. Because these are things that we're either confused on or just need more clarification on as well. Or it might mean that there's more than one option that we could discuss later. Of course, the mayor said it, of the different parties that is kind of written in here, and who the agency would service. This is all standard stuff, by the way, that Mindy and Eric had taken from current 28E agencies. So it is already been vetted by attorneys and submitted to the state. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Of course, there are still things that each attorney from the party should look at and should question and we should figure out, but just knowing that these are actual language that we took from legal 28E agencies is important for people to know. All right, and then I will let Mark and Dick talk about. Oh, yes, Eric's gonna talk about the impact. Sorry about that.
So I think probably what everyone wants to know is what is the impact of the community? And really what we're hoping for is no impact. When you dial 911 and you need an ambulance or you need a fire truck, just as it works now, we'll be there. You know, I think there are some things too that hopefully as we move into this 28E agency, we can improve, and we can improve things quicker because we have the ultimate authority over the organization. Things like, you know, we are really striving to get 24/7 paramedic coverage. Right now we're close, but we have a few nights where we don't have a paramedic, so it relies just on the volunteers. We provided some, I don't know if the council got the numbers on, you know, what the volunteers amount of hours versus the rest, but it's not. But yeah, like I said, hopefully no impact and things even better.
Except how we proposed it is that there, we can offer a recommendation to have 3 community members be a part of the agents of the board at large. So these would be community members, 1 referred by the trustees, 1 referred by the city, and 1 referred by the volunteers who aren't necessarily on the trustee board, aren't part of the fire department or on the city council, but still want to engage and have that knowledge and investment in decision-making as a taxpayer, or, you know, as someone who wants to be a part of that. So that would be an improvement in my eyes to have that, that kind of oversight from the community members as well. All right. So next, I think in Article 5, it goes over kind of the organization, and I'll let Mark and Dick kind of talk about our thoughts on the organization. And a lot, again, still up in the air, but this is just our recommendation.
Well, Mark wanted me to present most of the point. He's gonna fill in on the things I grew up and forget. What we're looking at right now, and I don't know where to look to talk to everybody.
All sides,
We're, what?
all sides.
All sides?
I actually originally intended that the trustees could kind of sit together. I feel like I don't mean to. The city council is not the only decision-making body in this room. Okay, so we're equally directed in your direction over there.
We can use our imagination
Yeah.
spatially.
What we're looking at for organization on the board that would govern this agency are 9 members. 2 would be appointed or selected by the city council. 2 would come from our rural trustees. 2 would come from the fire department. And then, as Dana just mentioned, there'll be 3 what we're kind of referred to as at-large individuals. And what we're kind of thinking right now, and again, that's not been decided exactly, is the rural folks would pick another individual, not necessarily a trustee. The city council would pick another individual from here in town, I would imagine. And then the fire department would come up with an individual. So that would make up the 9. Now, we're kind of looking at, well, once the thing gets off the ground and running, the individuals on the board will serve a 3-year term. But to begin with, it's gonna have to be kind of a staggered start. Because we don't want it to be, you know, the agency starts and then 3 years down the way, the whole administrative board could turn over. So we're probably looking at the three individuals would serve a 1-year term, 3 years, 3 individuals would serve a 2-year term, and then 3 individuals would serve the 3-year term, and then they roll over. Okay, now the people that were serving the 1-year term could be reelected, reappointed if they wanted to. We are strongly considering term limits though. And kind of the number that's been thrown around right now is maximum of 3 terms, which would be 9 years. That way we get new ideas and ideas on, you know, how to better serve the community and everything. So what would happen is once the agency is formed, because that would happen first, then as Dana mentioned, the city and the rural would both sign 2080 agreements with the agency. Okay, and we anticipate that when those 2 things takes place, and we think everything is kind of done that this task force needs to do, we will cease to function, and the administrative board of the agency would take over the operations of the fire and EMS. Fill in.
Looks like you covered it all, me. These board members are based on a 50-50 split, which is kind of what we kind of agreed to. It's based off the amount of calls, whether it's rural or in town. And I think it came out to 51-49, 52-48.
Yeah, it was almost exactly 50-50.
And it's been that way for quite a few years. Yeah,
At least
well,
4.
I went back 5 years.
Oh, 5 years.
okay. So if that, that's how we came up with the equal representation of between the rural and the city. Now, I think one of the concerns some of the task force members has is if that gets out of whack. I realize that's a technical term. But, that you will have to, the board of directors at that time will have to discuss adding either another, whichever way it gets out of balance, whether it's the city or the rural. Because the cost is split down the middle right now, so representation should be also. And if it gets to like a 60-40 or 65-40, you know, whatever. The representation needs to equal the financial contribution.
And we're probably looking that sort of information would probably be contained in the bylaws. They'd have the flexibility to change that because the bylaws would be much easier to change than rewriting agreements.
And we're having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out, that'll have to be done by the board of directors, not the task force. So it's something that you would probably like to see done before everything is signed, but it really can't be. It needs to be done by the board of directors.
Yeah, it's kind of a good segue to Mindy's portion, because when you talk about money, you want to be very careful, and we also want to recommend creating this agency so it can be very equitable and fair. So we want to go ahead and talk about the finances.
So, when we started looking at 2080 agencies and how they were financially supported and what other cities did to provide the or to split the obligation between the vested parties. There was a huge wide range of ways that this financial obligation was calculated. Some went by what was developed by ISU once upon a time. They refer to it as the cost share formula, which is essentially a combination of property valuations, the population in the specific area, and the number of fire calls that individuals go on. It's put into this formula and calculated out, and whatever that percentage calculates out to be is what, that percentage of the entity's support, financial support should be. I did a rough calculation when we were just initially starting this out that looked at the property valuations from the last assessment that I had gotten from Al Feldman for the rural trustees. I had pulled the property valuation assessment from online for the city. I looked at the latest census data for the population in the various townships that were included in rural trustee townships versus the population of the city of West Liberty. And then I did an average of the last 5 years of fire calls, because EMS is not considered an essential service, so is not taxed. So I did not include fire or ambulance calls. And after taking that rough calculation, what I found was that the percentage of obligation between the city and rural trustees was like 47-73 or something like that. It was very, or not 47-73. 47, it was very, very close to a 50-50 split. So rather than get too deep into the woods with calculating the cost share formula and the calculation of obligation, the task force, the majority of us felt that to start with a 50-50 split would be the best solution, and that the 28E agreement would reference that this needed to be recalculated and reevaluated on an annual basis to verify that the valuation of obligation isn't changing. So I put together draft budgets for both fire and EMS, but really those budgets are we get what we get. We can't tax taxpayers any more than is legally what we're legally allowed to by the state law. So for rural trustees, that's 60.75 cents per $1,000 property value assessment. The city is a little bit more difficult because they calculate the valuation in a different manner, but we can't tax any more than what we're currently doing. So this budget that I put together is more kind of a here's what we estimate it probably could be, that is basically what we're doing now. So our plan, should things go as we hope, is that no party or entity, either the city or the rural trustees, would be obligated to contribute any more than they are now. So we have a budget of roughly $100,000 each year. We would anticipate that we would be maintaining our expenses within that roughly 100. I think it might be 120,000 or 130,000. Whatever that budget is, we have to maintain that budget, plain and simple. So we put the budget together, which is essentially kind of the same budget we have now. And then each year, as I said, we would evaluate whether that budget is working, if we can operate with our operating costs at a lower level. And in our 28E agreement right now, we basically have it that however you guys calculate your, tax assessment, you'll pay 50-50 of the operating expenses, but you can only tax up to the maximum levy that's currently, state law. So not that you have to, it's up to that maximum levy to fund the fire operations. And again, that was kind of how we came to that decision, but we all agree that it's going to be important for this to be reviewed on an annual basis. Both the budget will need to be, assessed on a regular quarterly basis at the very least by the board. So that we know that we're operating in a manner that's going to be sustainable. And then one thing that we did take from, some of the advice that the attorneys had given has to do with basically voting power rights. So if in any one year we find that all of a sudden, the city's portion of the financial obligation changes so drastically, and we haven't quite decided what that drastically is. Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? What is that number, that percentage that imbalances it such that it would warrant an extra or more voting power? Because, you know, financial obligation does tie into, you know, quite a lot to what your voting power or voting rights should be. If you're paying more, then you know, there should be voting power tied to that additional financial obligation. So that's going to be written into probably the bylaws or in such a manner that would show that whatever the financial obligations are, they're matching that voting power rights.
And a reminder, like the state law, there are state laws that will be written in as well. The agency and all its members have to abide by the state laws. For instance, if they're like conflict of interest, if there's somebody on the board who they're voting on a decision where that person would benefit financially, like individually, or had a family member or something that benefit financially for voting on that, just like the council does, or I don't know if the trustees do this, but just like a normal governing agency, that person would have to recuse themselves. So there will be stuff like that also kind of written in that has to apply as well. Anything else about the financial portion? The EMS, do you want to go over quickly what the EMS was?
So again, the EMS, there will be substantially no change into what's being done now. How this works now is the city contributes $20,000 and the rural trustees contribute $20,000. That's in support of EMS, ambulance operation, and equipment reserve. Most of our budget comes from EMS billing. So what we bill out for medical calls is what is covering the majority of our operations budget. Because again, without it being a essential service, we aren't allowed, or we can't necessarily collect tax revenue for that service. So we'll have to maintain our budget within whatever our ambulance revenues bring in, because we can't
And last year that was 310,000.
200 it was 200 and some thousand, 215,000. I think it was.
That was a lot.
No, and we've had discussions in the task force on, let's say, when we transfer funds and things, what happens to the revenue funds that the city and the trustees have maintained as kind of the safety net and things like that. So that's all more discussion to have. And there are, of course, some safety things that we have to consider as well as a city or the trustees to have that kind of nest egg, so we can continue to support the services as well. But I think that goes into a good segue to kind of your portion, Eric, like
Sure.
assets and transfers and things like that.
So right now, all of the equipment and building is titled and deeded in the city. So as we hopefully take this over as an agency, we would want to have those assets titled to the actual agency. Initially, we kind of talked about just doing it, everything, one big full swoop. But as we've done some discussing, I think we are looking at potentially some leasing options. You know, there will be a separate leasing agreement that will be put together. We would put some terms in there, so, you know, more of a phased approach of transferring the assets over, the building, the trucks, and then the monies in the accounts. When it comes to the money in the accounts, we would take a portion of it, move it over to the agency. However, we would leave a little bit in the city's account just to handle anything that would come in, you know, ambulance billings, or till we actually get all those accounts settled. And then once that is complete, the remainder will be transferred over to the agency.
Sounds simple, but
Yeah, we had discussed in that leasing agreement to make sure that we put, you know, some terms in there that says, you know, put a cap on it. Everything needs to be transferred over. We haven't determined what that is, but 3 years or 5 years.
yeah, within 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And there's some other implications there. There's some insurance implications.
Mhm.
That, you know, from a leasing standpoint, you know, we may have to take out some additional insurance coverage. So those are all some things that we still need to work through. But I think we can come to an agreeable plan for all parties.
Also, we talked about like having an initial inventory of all the equipment. That we've seen in other 28E agreements as well. And since values differ throughout the years, just making sure, and the fire department already does this, right? They already have an inventory of their trucks and their major equipment and things like that. So this is easy peasy, hopefully,
Well,
things that we can,
The challenge is getting values on,
right,
you know, some of this older equipment.
right.
We can give it our best guess.
Well, and then we talked about not even putting a value on it,
Yeah.
just a
Looking at what
statement.
replacement
Yeah, a
for. certain pieces
replacement
of
value.
equipment is.
And what I'm talking about is if for some reason, like. We dissolve or we need to figure out valuation or something like that, all of this needs to be put in there so we know where. What stuff goes to who or what happens afterwards, and I think. Cara, if you want to go through the next section. About termination or withdrawal, which is very open right now, but I think Kara's had a lot of good ideas to bring to the task force as well. To talk about what if this happens?
Yeah,
Welcome, Omar.
yeah, because I think of it like. In essence, with any contract, you want to make sure that all your bases are covered. And if you want to look at it that way in corporate strategy, or if you want to say it's akin to a prenup. In the event something happens,
Sounds good with-
we have an outline of how assets would be divided. And the procedure we would take to do that. I believe that is one of the things that is listed as a in the state code too, as far as making sure that there is an avenue of dissolution included in the agreement. So throughout the draft, we want to make sure we reflect the state code that we have to abide by, which I believe is chapter 60 in the state of Iowa code. And make reference to that, and having that inventory that Dana had talked about, I think is very important to understand at least what we have listed and to what area it gets utilized, whether it's something that is specific to rural or something that gets used more in one avenue than another. So that we have an idea that can be added to how things would be distributed. And then also kind of reference to future acquisitions and how they're going to be agreed upon for distribution. I know that we also need to include too, this might be going off of the withdrawal and termination a little bit, but in the very beginning of the document, under the first reference, Article 1, name and duration, I think it's important that we include a reflection of that as far as renewal, like shall renew annually for subsequent one-year term, each fiscal year or calendar year, however we're going to do that, I don't know, but have some sort of reference in there for determining a timeline and reevaluation of this. And then, you know, I assume it'd be coordinated with when the board meets or their annual meeting, and then be able to determine at that time if there's any amendments that need to be made. So I think that's very important to include that under Article 1 with a referral to Article 10 that gets more specific into how that withdrawal, termination, dissolution happens. And I do think under termination, we need a little bit more work as far as the second paragraph goes, right? Currently, it's listed as complete termination of this agreement shall require a unanimous vote of the board of directors. And I do think we need to kind of review that a little bit.
One of those things that is
Yeah.
on the list of things that need to be looked at.
Because I think that I'd like to get a legal opinion on whether or not that is something that it is required to have unanimous vote.
Yeah.
Really.
We kind of talked about it at the meeting when you weren't there, Cara. I'm not sorry, I haven't updated you on that, but I think it was just worded. And I don't think it was as if somebody can't quit if they don't have unanimous vote. It was specifically talking about the dissolution of the agency entirely. Has to be unanimous. So if the city decides they want to break away from the agency, create their own fire department, all of that, they have all of the rights to do that, which is kind of included in here. They just need to give like a 1-year notice. They need to settle all their accounts, things like that. They absolutely have the power
So
to
the
do
first
that.
paragraph discusses that if one entity leaves
Yeah,
the
You
organization.
have to give yours.
The second paragraph is both entities or all entities, everyone agrees to dissolve the agency, then obviously we have a unanimous vote anyway, so it's kind of a redundant thing, but first paragraph is one person or one group wants to leave. Second paragraph is everyone agrees we're dissolving this.
yeah, but it's important for our attorneys when you go back and you have your attorneys look at that too, because you know, sometimes how courts work is they like to read between the lines or misinterpret things, or they have a different interpretation. So that's what we want to really be careful about when we're talking to our attorneys, to look through this to make sure that nothing can be interpreted differently. Because if it can, then we need to clarify and make those statements a lot more specific.
Yeah, and I do think we need to make sure that there's reference in here to 670 of the state of Iowa code, tort liability of government subdivisions, because it's important that we acknowledge in the event tort comes along, we are able to cover our bases.
I don't know what that means, but I trust you. And we'll-
It's a action or claim in the event somebody files a claim or there's a wrongful death,
So
there's
you're
a
talking about
wrongful action.
There's liability indemnification clause in here.
Yeah.
Also,
But that I think we need to include that reference
It is.
in that.
and the
To
withdrawal and termination article, you mean?
under liability, if you want to put it under there, under insurance coverage, liability and indemnification, whatever, but
And
There
you're
is a-
talking specifically about that 670 thing, Cara?
670 state of Iowa code.
I'll make a
Referring
note.
to that.
All right, thank you.
Does that apply for 28E agreements though, is what I'm wondering.
I believe so.
Well, it might apply as us, as the government agency.
Because,
So
well,
again,
it applies to any municipality, only because we're gonna have to have that. You're gonna have to have that. We have it now to cover us in the event, somebody goes out on a call and for whatever reason, somebody gets injured or somebody does something negligent and causes property damage, personal injury, we're covered.
So,
that's part of
These
our
are-
insurance.
yeah, these are homework items for the
Yeah,
task force.
yeah.
So rather than troubleshoot it right now, let's leave that for the task force. Cara, you were on withdrawal and termination. Is there anything else you wanted to add about that? Section
Just
there?
being, no, just what I said about, there's going to need to be more like
Yeah,
discussion on that. yeah.
Definitely, a lot of this is definitely a draft, a lot to be worked out here, some detail.
Yeah.
So, Dana, did you want to keep going with anything else here? Or are you ready for questions and discussion from the room?
Well, do you want me to just go through the next steps and then have questions or
That's
have
fine.
questions in the
Yep.
next step? Okay, so these are just some next steps that I thought of that would help us continue to move forward.
Just
Sure.
one thing though, I don't mean to interrupt you,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but just remember, we can't take any action tonight, right?
Right.
So we're just, if you just put the ideas out there and then we can kind of come back to it. I know you know that. I just want to clarify.
No, it's always good to double check. So one thing that the task force would recommend is if the council and rule trustees could come to kind of a consensus of, yes, we want to continue with the agency, continue moving forward to figure out all those other details. Similar to what we did in September after Eric had presented.
And the reason is, sorry to interrupt.
No,
I
go
wanted
for
to
it.
Say, the reason is that, we have, discovered some consultants that are very versed in 28E agency agreements like this. That can help us to kind of be a neutral third party and offer the advice that fits all entities and we, that will be a part of this agency that, that they are basically covered and that their interests are, looked out for and protected. And, obviously consultants cost money, so we would have to figure out how to pay for this and if the general direction is not to move forward with the agency, then there's no sense in us engaging with a consultant to, finalize these last pieces so we can get things put together. And, with this consensus, it would essentially mean that, all things barred and, nothing drastic falls apart, that, we are going to proceed with this and, we don't want to waste money on something that's not going to happen.
Mhm. So it's a request for council and for the rural trustees to speak up if you feel like it's on the right track, and moving, continue moving forward, or if you feel like this can't work and we're spinning our wheels, then now is a good time to say something.
Now, can I add something?
Can I finish?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, sorry, I forgot.
No, this is how we work every Monday, so welcome to the task force, y'all. So. I don't have a gavel, but I need one, no. So my next thing was if there was a consensus by the trustees, by the cities. To continue the momentum we have and to continue trying to finalize this. Perhaps going back to your constituents, your meetings, your members, really thoroughly going through this detail, like a separate work session, really, detail by detail. And providing some feedback to the task force by like March 31st, maybe. Like putting a deadline on it so that we know where we're at in consensus together. Where we kind of see, yep, that's still a question mark that we need to figure out, or hey, the rural trustees added this. And that makes sense to us, and the city's like, yeah, that makes sense, so let's change it that way. I mean, maybe we won't even need a consultant at that point if we can really figure this out just by coming together and working with our attorneys as well. But in the event we do need a consultant, I mean, we don't see it being more than, $5,000 to $10,000, if that. Because really our scope of work is gonna be very limited and very narrowed. So we're not going to make it a free-for-all and allow them to do this very in-depth, analysis, all that. We just need somebody who has not worked with any of the parties, but has the expertise to just put the, what's the word? Hit the nail on the head and get it done. Yeah, everything. So, sorry, Cara. Go
No,
ahead.
no,
Thank you.
I apologize. Yeah. No, I just wanted to add to in the discussion under the organization, Article 5, that was talked about. Initially, I have to apologize for because I misunderstood early on about incorporating the ambulance part, the EMS part, because I thought we were talking about fire, but if we're talking about both fire and ambulance, I just wanted to reiterate about the fact that if this incorporates both wings of emergency services, that the emergency services wing currently that has paid personnel as part of that is not the tax funded entity that's mandated by the state. Only the fire is the taxable entity. So right now, the city assumes 100% responsibility for making sure that the personnel is paid because they're employees. The budget is set, and the benefit packages for those employees and the IPERS that goes into that. And I just wanted to make sure that it was understood that there will be no safety net as far as the payment of employees, the benefit packages, IPERS contributions whatsoever, because the ambulance part only generates revenue from their calls. And that doesn't mean that you get 100% of that revenue. That means you get a portion of that revenue for those calls, because about a good part of that is Medicare, Medicaid. So the reimbursement will not give you 100% of what is billed. You're questioning something.
That'd be a point of concern.
Keep going and we'll bring it up during the questions.
So I just wanted to make sure that that was known, that that may fluctuate. I don't know that. I don't think anybody does. So that might be an uncertainty to start off with, because there will be no safety net. The only safety net, the only safety net that you all would have would be the reserves, reserve funds. And as, I mean, I'd hate to spend all of your reserve funds, but I just wanted to make sure that that was understood. Go ahead.
We'll get
Go
to
ahead.
questions in just a second, actually. Are you done with that statement?
With that
Yeah.
part, I just wanted to make sure, because that's Because right now that, total operating cost for just EMS is it I know you had mentioned 214,000 last year or something like that.
There's something around there.
That's what it's generated.
And we collected 220.
220
So there's
for the
definitely,
year.
definitely concerns on all sides, for some of those things. So that's what you're bringing up, Cara, and I think that's a good point. Anything else from task force as far as presenting here to the room that you want to add before we go into a question and discussion time?
I think I'd just like to add, I think that the task force has worked very well together. I think we've done a good job proving that this will work and can work. So I just would hope that, we get some good questions here tonight, if anyone has concerns. And I'd like to really start moving this thing forward.
Okay, well said. Anything else, task force? Okay. All right, we'll open the room up for questions. I'd like to start with members of the rural trustees, actually, if you are here and have questions. We were gonna have kind of a process to write these down and everything, but we're a small group, so I think I would appreciate it though, just for the record, if you would just introduce yourself again. Just kind of state your name and then your question would be helpful for us, I think. If there's anyone here from trustees, you have questions for the task force? Yes.
Clarence Fincham. Under the withdrawal and termination clause, you said that one entity can leave with 1 year's notice. What if that entity is the city, or is that turn into a termination of the agreement?
So if the city decided they no longer wanted to participate in the agency, then rural trustees would have the option to continue with the agency. The city would have to provide a year's notice so that we could settle any obligations. And also assets would have to be distributed or split basically. And we figure, from the point in time that we receive notification, that's going to take at least a year to have basically resolved and a solution provided. You could also at that time choose to withdraw from the agency as well. And then you as a group would have to figure out how you wanted to proceed with fire protection services. If you wanted to try and do something else with the city and enter into a different 28-year agreement with the city directly, if you wanted to try to find another institution to provide fire services for your townships, whatever other options you may have, but you would have the option to maintain your agreement with the agency. At that point in time, we would just be half less assets, basically, or, however the distribution worked out.
And mind you, before the city would jump ship, they would need to have a fire protection ready, to provide their community members, because it's required, just like it is with the trustees, to provide fire protection. So I don't know why that would happen, but say, West Branch moves their fire department across the interstate and it's only 5 minutes away from West Liberty, and it's this multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art, thing, and the city of West Liberty decides, oh, we're gonna have West Branch service our community instead. That's an example, but there should still be, some kind of services to provide, because the volunteers will still be there. Whatever equipment the rural and volunteer, the agency maintains will still be there. It's not like we won't have to, the agency won't have to scramble a little bit to try to see how can we kind of fill that, but they also won't have to serve the city of West Liberty either. So it's not necessarily they have to have that much income to come in anymore, because they won't be answering calls to the city of West Liberty. So hopefully it will balance out in that way. I mean, right now, we can only think hypotheticals, but it shouldn't leave anybody completely high and dry if we've thought about it correctly, is what I think. I don't know if you all want to chime in, but
Does that answer
Yes.
your question? Okay. Other questions from trustees? Yes,
Jerry Anderson, Watson Township. One thing I think we ought to consider is if we're gonna do this, allocation of costs after year one, it's pretty easy to determine this is a city call, this is a rural call. I think we ought to make a third category of interstate.
Oh, we excluded those costs.
Okay, but I think maybe to account for them, we maybe.
Yeah, no, those were excluded from the calculation because they're neither rural or city.
How about your mutual aid calls? How did it
We excluded those.
exclude those two?
So interstate-
Once you got that part covered, I think that's.
it's a good point.
And then I guess, at our trustee meeting, we were talking about the leasing of the equipment and the staggered transition. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the constituents that we represent to have to insure that equipment twice through a lease insurance and then the insurance for the entity. So in my mind, it might make more sense to the folks we represent to get that equipment transferred over day one. And that way, we're not both paying the insurance twice for the folks we represent. We have to work this all out, but it is. Why tax our folks twice?
Well, are we just making questions?
For the renter's insurance, I guess, is what it would look like.
You want to
And then,
respond to that?
Question. I just had a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question on that, because I don't know whether or not it would be considered necessarily double tax, only because if the city still maintained the deeds, then it would be their responsibility to do the insurance on structure or vehicles, and then the insurance on the agency part, or whoever is going to be operating. If the vendor is the volunteers, then I think it's incumbent upon the volunteers to get the insurance so that when they're utilizing the vehicles on a call, they would be insured.
Right, but the operating costs of the agency will come from tax revenues paid by city and rural trustees. So what he's saying is, if the agency has to pay insurance, then that insurance cost is an operating cost, is going to be covered partly by the rural trustees and partly by the city, while the city is also paying insurance on those vehicles. So essentially, your taxpayers are paying twice for insurance.
So that's an argument, basically, that's an argument for transferring the vehicles to the agency. That's what the discussion is.
Right.
If city wants to maintain the title deed to the equipment, to the trucks, then do we know that for sure, that that's the requirement for the insurance, that there would be a little bit of double up there?
Yeah.
Okay,
It wouldn't be as much because it's
Yeah.
like a liability insurance
Sure.
and like a runner's insurance, but it's, I mean, I don't know if that's the technical term for it, but that's the way I think of it in my head.
Yeah.
So it's not like what the city pays to insure all of their vehicle or all of the vehicles, we wouldn't pay the same amount.
You're carrying liability.
But we would pay a much lower amount than what we would if we had title to.
right.
But
So-
it still would be additional.
So that's one of those big questions that is in the mix, right? As far as transferring the assets, it's easy to lease a building, and the task force has talked about leasing the building, maybe having a period of years where these things are transferred over time. The equipment could follow the same pattern, and then it sounds like maybe there would be a little bit of double insurance payment, or they could be transferred sooner, and to eliminate that. That's kind of just to sort of recap, I guess.
Would it,
Um,
would it make a difference to just lease the building, but deed over the equipment?
Yeah, I think
That would
that's
be
the option that's
Oh,
being
okay.
proposed, right? Yeah,
Yeah, we have the, I don't know what I look at, 5 different options, 4 options.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay, so again, that's more homework for the task force, but
Mhm.
thank you for bringing that
Bring up.
up. And it's definitely something that needs to be dug into a little bit more. Other questions from township trustees? If you think of something later, that's fine. Jump back in. Yes, go ahead.
No reason, I'm very supportive of this month, they put the fire out, so we could all burn my fire down there, but anyway, there were a couple things about the people at large. You were saying, and it's nice, it's a good thing that you've got, the council's gonna nominate one. The firefighters and the, my only point is. You probably should be somebody outside of that group then.
Yeah.
Right.
You haven't included that. They mentioned that it could come from like the city council or the trustees, but if it's really at large, it could be.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever see how you're gonna,
Our
Decide
thoughts
on
are that those would be community members. So a community member from the city, a community member from our rural community. And then a community member that either has served on the fire department or has experience. Would also be, that is a community member, would also serve as at large to kind of basically represent all of the parties in the agreement. So you're right, no, they wouldn't be rural trustees.
look at that was, the other thing is, when you're talking about doing financial look every year, I think that would be, you can get website around. You know, if you're really gonna do something like that, so that, 2 or 3 years, or even 5 years, before you start
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah,
The great thing
Because-
about,
and that kind of leads me to my other point, is, okay, we're Lake Township, we could leave any day, and whatever you guys decide. And more things, the thing is, when I look at volunteer fire departments, and we have 12 of them down there. I see more 20 years down the road, you're gonna be adding. You know, when you look at the, and believe me, I told everybody, my dad was on the deal when they bought, when Lake came to. When I lived there. But you see the nickels, and I think they're back in the 70s. He said, we don't think we want to go to nickels because we don't have enough population. Or catalyst. So I think you need to include something, not just for people to get out, but how are you gonna handle
that's a good point.
That is a good one.
and not that it's that hard, but you start collecting money, but then like with the inventory and all that. Because if you get those, they're gonna bring inventory in too, so it's just something to think about, but I down the road, I'm sure it's stuff like that.
That's a very good point. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
And I was just gonna comment to your like annual review. The good thing about having the board create things is if they decide after the first of 2 years, yeah, this is pretty, we're comfortable now to where we can extend it to 2 or 3, and that's an agreement, and they might put a clause in there, like if there's a whole subdivision that, happens in West Liberty, and then we need to have like a off schedule kind of meeting to reassess and things like that, then that's all things that the board can come up with, which is the great thing about the agency.
Got a friend in Montpelier, they got it stuff. Something like that happens here, it's like.
Right. Yeah, those are all great points.
Members of the fire department? Questions?
Mine isn't a question, and I can save it for later. It's just more of a clarification on the EMS salary and income.
Let's hear it.
So first of all, yes, it's true. What we bill out is not what we collect. We are very well aware of that. It doesn't matter if it's Medicaid, Blue Cross, or a private pay. We are always going to take a loss. That is one of the issues with EMS. It is one of the issues why we are trying to push EMS as an essential service. My role and my responsibility is to keep us within the budget that we have. Mine is tighter than anybody because it really is approximations. I do track our study. I do look back. I can go back. I have the records for exactly what we have collected over the last several years to trend out where my budget proposal for the board would be. I have to keep that in mind. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of providers knocking on anybody's door right now. I don't see our staff growing exponentially anytime soon, and even adding on staff has to be within those constraints. So my budget is the tightest budget. We are very well aware of that. We are looking at the fact that as this agency is built, we still qualify for IVers. So that has been built into our cost projection. We do need to provide health insurance. That has been built into the cost projections. So we are looking ahead at that. We're not going into this blind by any means. And I can state confidently from each of the paid employees that we do have, they're very much in favor of going forward with all of this.
Thank you. Other members of the fire department? By the way, if you're, sounds like you're good at budgets, I'd like you to look at my home budgets.
I am frugal as all get out.
Members of the fire department? Other questions for the task force? Yeah, yes, please, Larry.
The board, I'm assuming the everyday handling of personnel and everything is still gonna be within the fire department's realm. So how often do you plan on the board meeting? Is it gonna be a monthly board, a bi-monthly board, a quarterly board?
I think initially, we thought it would probably be monthly to start. So we get a lot of stuff to talk about in those first few months. But then that board then can determine, what the cycle of meetings would be. I would say at a minimum, it would be quarterly.
It might be, one comment about that, it might be worth including too, who can call a meeting perhaps.
Yeah.
That way, if
Sure.
one party has a concern, then
Yep.
they might be able to, bring that up.
And also David mentioned March 31st is people trying to get their questions and concerns done. You have, would you like it done by summer, or do you have any time frame when you either, obviously you need to know if you're going to go forward or not, but what's your end game here as far as when you'd like to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is my own personal opinion, but I would think middle of summer. We've got some things we need to discuss, but I think they're all things that we can get ironed out, so July timeframe.
Yeah. And it might, and I'm not an expert at this, but it might complicate things that the city has to submit their budget by a certain time. So what does that look like if we do this in the middle of summer and we're in a new fiscal year already, and things like that? That's all questions that us as city council need to figure out and consult our attorneys and our staff who are experts in those areas of what that would look like. So it really determines on what's possible between the trustees and us, and the volunteers, like the past 100 years, I assume are pretty flexible, as long as they still feel supported and can still answer calls.
That's a good point about budget, yeah. Other questions from members of the fire department? Jamar, I see you're back there. I'll come back to you, okay? From the West Liberty Index, itching to ask a question. Just a second, I'll come back to you, okay?
I went through this where I lived back in 2006.
Jamar, I'll come back to you, okay? Just a minute. I want to go through the members of these representative boards, and then I'll come back to you, okay? Yeah, no problem. Any other members of the fire department with questions? Okay, members of city council.
Yeah, okay, so under Article 5, the first sentence talks about like the 9 members, blah, 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 terms for 2 years. But then on the next page, it talks about the terms for 3 years. So is that just like a typo? Or
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perfect. And then like the next line down where it's highlighted.
Sounds like we found a proofreader.
Oh, you got me. I love this.
That should be 3. We originally said 2, so that's
Okay,
why.
so it just needs to be changed. And then like in the next sentence, it says, the serve until December 31st, 2025. Are you gonna change that to reflect the staggered start things?
Yes.
Okay, cool, perfect. And then at the bottom of like that paragraph where it talks about the two and the two and the two and then the three people, I think that's a great idea. It doesn't seem like it indicates now that those people will be appointed, like one from city, one from rural, one from whatever. So I would worry that in the future, it could be like 3 people who happen to live in the city, and then all of a sudden, boom, we have a majority of 5, and that's not really fair. So like, will that be made more clear in that part too?
We could definitely do that.
I could just see that like, yes, we have good intentions now, but like in 10 years, who knows? And like, what
And
if,
we'd also actually talked about allowing the board or actually each entity to decide how they recruit that person. For instance, like for city council, we talk about, do we do an appointment or do we put an ad or, stuff like that. So like, would the city do a call on social media and post like those who are interested to come, right, and then, or if the trustees discuss at a certain time who that person will be. So I think there's some flexibility there, but I think it is
I'd like to see it
important.
written down.
Yeah, it is important to put those details down.
And that makeup of that board is definitely something that the task force has discussed a lot.
Yeah.
It may change. It's certainly a topic of discussion.
Okay. Article number 7, finance and budget, it talks about doing the 50-50 split, which I get. I have the cost share formula, so I appreciate that. I see it's 53 and 46, so not exactly 50-50, which, okay. What I'm wondering is it reasonable to specify in here that for the first 5 years, we'll reevaluate or like we'll use the formula again at the end of the year to make sure it's not gone up to 48-52 or 45-55, or like, is it reasonable to recalculate the formula?
That's discussed in here. It gets recalculated every year.
Okay, I saw that it would be evaluated yearly for the number of board of directors. I just didn't know if that also applied to the budget part too, or if it just applied to the number of board of directors.
Now, that should be in there,
Okay,
but we can make sure it is.
Okay.
That is the intent, that part of the annual review of the 28E agreement will be a review of the cost share obligation
okay,
and the budget.
And I think what you were seeing actually is one of the 4 years, right? And then you average them.
Yeah.
And the average actually came out to 50.6 versus 49.4.
oh, okay,
So it was super, super close, but,
sure,
and that's what Cara and Mark and I were trying to figure out earlier, but now it makes sense.
That was one of the 3 cost share valuations. So that might have been like property assessed value, might have been that 48. But when you add all 3 pieces together, it's
The 50.6 by 49.4.
okay. I just didn't know if that changed in the future, if it was,
Yeah.
because I see that it's like, yes, we will reevaluate it so that we know we have the right number of board people, but I just want to make sure that applied to budget too.
Yeah, definitely.
Good
Very
question.
important.
I guess under Article 9, the withdrawal and termination part, I see it says necessary adjustments shall be made on the basis of outstanding debts and obligations, which makes sense. I don't know if it's like specific enough. I guess what I'm thinking is like, okay, so we try to say it goes okay for like a year or 2, and then at the end of 2 years, the city's like, oh, this is not working out so great. We're gonna withdraw from this, but we already gave away our fire trucks. Oh, shoot, what do we do? Like, is it specified in the, like, does it need to be more specific about if like we have a divorce, who's gonna get the custody of whatever? Or is it okay to not, just, because it just says necessary adjustments.
Yeah.
And I feel like my version of necessary might be different than somebody else's version of necessary.
That's
And maybe I'm reading too much into it.
I'm sure
Major
that'll be
point.
something that the attorneys kind of polish out.
Okay,
The idea is that
very good.
we can't just split the fire trucks, half, you get half, because the valuation of those fire trucks are
Right.
going to be drastically different. So if we do, you get the ladder truck and you get the rescue truck, then we have to look at the valuation, but it's pointless to do that today.
right, sure.
Because the valuation of those 2 vehicles today is gonna be different next year.
Yeah,
And so what we were trying to do is be general enough that it was understood that, we're splitting this 50-50,
Okay.
but it may not be that you get 2 fire trucks and you get 2 fire trucks. We may have to do some other type of, divvying up of these assets so
Sure,
that
sure.
you know, value wise, you're getting the same amount of, you know, your fair market value is equal to, you know, rural trustees fair market value. So it's hard to like say, okay, we're gonna divvy up the trucks this way and, you know, you both get an ambulance, you both get this much equipment because, you know, our one ambulance is several years older than our other ambulance. We're looking at buying a new ambulance thanks to the ARPA fund. So, you know, well, how is it fair that the city gets that brand new ambulance, but the rural trustees are stuck with one that's 10 years old?
One, yeah,
You know what I mean?
right,
So we were trying to be general enough that it was understood that we are going to do, you know, we're gonna have a professional come in, do evaluation, assess the value of all of this equipment, and then figure out what that is and split it evenly.
yeah, that makes sense. I just didn't know if that was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Definitely needs to be more detailed. I agree with you on
I
that.
think that's why I mentioned the inventory and making sure that that was either that.
Yeah, there's I think it's try something Mahaska, maybe, I don't know. You might know, but it's super detailed, like to the T, and so I can share that with Concord. That might give us some more ideas on.
Rural has a different set of needs than the
Yep,
city. They're gonna need water trucks, brush
Yep.
trucks, so it's gonna be. very different.
Absolutely.
You can't just split it down the middle.
Right.
And then my last question is, in the future, when we make a new, when the 28E makes a new purchase, like a new truck or a new ambulance, where's the funding for that come from? Like, are we planning ahead? Is that what the 15,000 a year in the green rectangle represents? Like, what happens when eventually we need to replace something? Like, do we have to have a fundraiser for it? Or did we build a savings account into this, or?
Several different funds that have, there's a truck replacement fund, even.
Right now, the way it's set up, and this is how we anticipate that we would still continue to do it. So how things are set up is, rural trustees, is billed by the city for half of the operating costs.
Right,
In addition to that half of operating costs, they also put in $15,000, 17,000, sorry, I always do that, I always say $17,000 a year. It's put into the fire equipment reserve account.
okay. I
The
just,
city also contributes, and that is part of the, you know, tax revenues that are collected for property taxes. Additionally, we have the city and the rural trustees contribute $20,000 for EMS. That's put into
Right.
the ambulance reserve account. So we have those two accounts. That $17,000 a year is what our equipment reserve account is. And that comes from part of the, basically the tax property levies that we make. So we would anticipate that that would not change. That the city would still contribute, you know, whatever amount is decided, 17,000, toward the equipment reserve account for, you know, fire. And the rural trustees will still continue to do that.
okay, I just didn't see it like on the spreadsheet thing, and I might have missed it, or it might not be there, and so I just wanted to
Probably
make
not
sure.
there.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure like we thought about that. Okay, of course,
By a bylaw
Yeah.
stipulation, then
that's all my questions.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you.
if I can, so just to answer council members.
Yes, please.
So where the city will lose levy taxing is on employee benefits. So when we look at our budget today, we are basing our budget not only on the 810, but like what we talked about when we were certifying that levy. We lose the taxing levy on employee benefits. So that would lower our taxing authority for gathering additional funding for specifically to the fire from the tax piece of it. And so it will reduce our tax levy by the.
And is that based on how many employees are like on EMS?
Yep.
And how many do we have?
So I don't want to get into the weeds of it tonight, but it's based on all general fund employees. Employed by the city, we have the taxing levy for employee benefits. And so then that is divided out by a percentage to each one of those general funds. And again, is primarily going towards your benefiting employees. And then we have tax levy for, insurance and liability and shit. So again, those are reduced, so we won't have more to levy for if and we can get.
We also won't be spending that, right? Because those benefits will be paid for by the 28E, right?
Right, but when you're looking at the budget now, I want you to be clear because you're looking at payroll and I want to note that the revenue is going to change.
Okay.
Yes, I agree, it's gonna change by that, but I just want to make sure that we understand that that tax levy will come down.
And we could talk more about that at our own budget meeting, just to go deeper into it, so we understand it, you
And to
know, because
answer your
I don't
question,
follow it.
Dana, There are 3 full-time.
Exactly.
Part-time.
I'm good.
Ashley,
Yeah, I'm good.
okay, great questions, great question. Other members of city council, questions? Not tonight, okay. Ms. Levson, you have a question for us?
Yeah, I just have 2 really quick ones. What other 28E agreements did you guys look at? And what were these or governments? And then, who were the consultants you were talking about?
I'm trying to think of all the ones we looked
Yeah,
at.
we looked at so many different 28E.
Solon, West Branch, Tiffin.
DeWitt?
Minneapolis, Minneapolis. I mean, yeah, I mean, we looked at agent or towns and similar in our size that have done the same thing.
I literally went to the Secretary of State website and looked at their 28E agreements and found all of the ones that listed as agencies and reviewed their agreement. Okay. That it took hours, hours and hours. But that's how I did it. I didn't know an easier way to do it, so.
Did you want to respond about the consultants, or I don't know if we know
yeah.
what we're.
So,
Yeah.
I just stumbled upon this RFP that, Johnston and Grimes, Metropolitan Fire had sent out to bid for consultants. They're doing their own review of their services and things, and it's not the same as 2 cities that kind of share services. But I thought the RFP was really helpful, and Mindy and I reached out to the city administrator of Grimes and the deputy chief, fire chief of Johnston, and they had a meeting with myself, and Mindy was able to join as well and talk about that process, and he forwarded me a whole list of consultants. They used the Emergency Services Consulting International. I think it's out of California or somewhere in the West Coast, but I mean, he literally forwarded us resolutions they use and the RFPs, the templates they use, a list of consultants that really focus on fire and EMS services. So we have that little nest egg of resource if we have to use that for the future.
Great. Yes,
I look at things the same way Councilmember Smith does. When the discussion piece came up about dissolution, there was a piece about if one wants out, this is what happens. If everybody wants out, this is what happens, but nothing in the middle. So like what, and this is an emergency preparedness thing, you prepare for the worst. So what happens if 2 people want out, not the third, then the dissolution doesn't happen automatically, what's the plan? Because like, I think it was Councilmember McFerren said, if we're gonna have a prenup vote just in case. Having a fiction is always good. I don't know if that needs discussed or not, but.
yeah, it's a great question, and I think that section, you know, everyone agrees needs more finessing there to figure out, yeah, that kind of thing. Good point. Are there any other questions for the task force from the room? Okay, I have one actually, for rural trustees. I just don't understand how the fire district works very well. And somebody mentioned that one township could leave at any time. How does that, can you explain to us how that works? Can a township leave the rural fire district? Or is that set by,
Well, they'd have to get coverage from some other department.
but if they chose to do that, they would be able to do that.
Yeah, I don't know of any written agreement that
I don't think it's ever happened. Is, you think?
Not since I've been going.
Okay,
The fire department has their district that they cover.
right.
And, yeah,
The board of supervisors would have to change the district.
the lines,
boundary.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is it Board of Supervisors who sets the fire district borders?
as far as I know, that should have been.
Okay,
But I guess the change for you guys would be the property evaluations, because you wouldn't be collecting property taxes for that township.
Yes.
So in that instance, it may be worthwhile to reevaluate the cost share formula, just to make sure that the percentage of financial obligation had not changed significantly based on that.
I guess that was my question, because if that is possible, that's a different situation than city, which is just a homogeneous, entity, right? So if you do have multiple entities that could, you know, what happens if you leave? If several of those townships were to leave, then does the city's cost burden go way up to be proportionate? You know what I mean? Like, that might be worth something thinking, just again, preparing for worst case scenario was a totally new thought, but it's
Could go the other way.
it certainly could. Yeah, certainly could.
I don't
Now-
think we need to do it.
I don't think they can either, not without. a
Because
lot
they
of-
have to provide, I don't think they could do it. I mean, I'd have to check.
Just something to research then if we're not sure. Yeah, that was a totally new thought to me.
On top of that, I mean, if the city were to expand and annex in different areas of the rural, then that's gonna change balances too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there needs to be flexibility in that, which is built into it, right? So that it can be adjusted. But yeah, that was just a new thought. Okay, any other questions? Last call.
I
Ashley.
don't know if you can answer this or not, so if you can't, like, totally cool, I get it. I think there's currently litigation from the fire department to the city, and I don't know what it's about, I haven't read it, I'm new here, but if.
From
we-
the rural trustees against the city and the fire department.
Okay, cool.
Not
Okay.
against the fire department.
Like I said, I don't know what all is in it. I'm just wondering if we pass this and we like do the 28 agree and everybody's cool and everybody's happy, like, does that get dropped? Does that mean we're all good? Or does it like keep going?
I'll let you guys.
We're working on that.
Okay, I won't worry about it.
The thing that's really needed is to rebuild trust, right? So
Got it.
just to kind of go into that broader conversation. For this to work, it has to be a partnership. And partnerships that are formed under pressure are not ideal. So the thing that's really needed is for all parties here to do whatever they can do to extend olive branches, forgive, reconcile, build each other up, and rebuild trust. That is what is needed, right? So, and I think we've seen a lot of that recently, right? So that's definitely,
Yeah,
good.
we're looking ahead.
You're working on it, all right, I try to believe it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think if those are all the questions, I think we did pretty well, 7:38. So, yeah.
We still haven't asked about that consensus.
Yes,
Oh,
you're right. That's
Kind of important.
well, we
It
can't
doesn't-
vote on it,
yeah.
but I guess the question would be if there are members of the rural trustees
Yeah.
or the city council who want to speak to that at all now, we won't, this can't be an official vote, but if basically the question is, does you feel like the task force is on the right track here? Roughly speaking.
I can't even do like a thumbs up.
No, we can't, but
No.
just if you have anything to share about that, now would be a good time to bring it up, I guess. Otherwise, the task force is gonna carry on and that's kind of our default.
When will the city be taking an official vote on whether you're gonna continue on or not? Yeah, I mean, at some point in time, you have to make a decision, right? You can't just keep having fact finding missions.
I'll answer your question very, very clearly. The task force, the mayor's task force will carry on. And the goal of the task force is to get to a 2080 agreement and related documents that these entities can vote on and give a thumbs up or down on.
You wanna get
Right.
that done and then have.
It's the only way that, you can't say what anybody will or won't do until we know what we're exactly talking about, right? So I think the default is that we carry forward until there's something that you can actually vote on, right?
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe we should have another task force meeting to discuss what happened here. See if there's anything tweaks we need to make in the current draft, and then Dick, you can share what we come up the next updated with the trustees. The council can talk about what the tweaks that we had made based on this work session, and then provide that feedback. If March 31st is too soon, I don't know how soon the trustees meet, but I just wanted to give kind of a date on it so the task force can understand when they would have that feedback. But
Do we need to have our lawyers review it before we can vote on it?
oh, they will.
Okay, I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
Well, can council vote on a consensus at your regular council meeting?
They would recommend to see.
Well, no,
They can say individually that individually,
On the next agenda? Or,
they can ask for it to be on, it doesn't have to be the next agenda, it could be on a specific date, but
yeah,
what you're saying here is that what council is saying, and they don't have to, but if one or individual council member would like to add a comment saying that they would recommend to see an action item on a
If you-
future council meeting.
if you couldn't hear, City Clerk Geertz, she's saying that council members, if you want to make a statement that you'd like to see an action item on an upcoming city council agenda, where you could really give a thumbs up or down to continue or not, then you could, you can make that statement now if you'd like to.
Ashley.
As
You
a
would like
council
to-
member, I would like to see an action item on an upcoming agenda for this.
Do we notice?
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's probably enough for tonight. Did I miss anything?
You did a great job,
Okay.
Mayor.
We'll leave it at that for now. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.